This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Hi, Rob.
1-800-610-7035 worldwide toll free. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV. And you can listen to the X-Zone 724-365 at www.xzoneradiotv.com. We're coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and around the world on the Starcom radio network. My guest this hour is Allen H. Greenfield. We're going to be talking to Allen about everything, well, from the occult to UFOs. He is a ceremonial magician, American occultist, ufologist, writer, editor, Gnostic bishop, and a whole slew of other things as well, but he's also a very nice guy. We're going to be talking to...
Yes, I was about to say an all-around nice guy.
Oh, well, you didn't let me get there. Hey, Alan, how are you, buddy?
Yeah, you beat me to it, so that's okay.
How are you, Alan?
Older. How about yourself?
Older, too, my friend.
The Men in Black have been interfering with us. I've been on hold here for about the last 10 minutes. Interesting show you were having there, and thank you for plugging my local network, CNN. I remember when it was just a rented studio with Ted Turner in the wings while doing the Neil Bortz TV show. It goes back like 40 years. Gee.
Hey, listen, Alan, what have you been up to since you and I last talked?
Well, they called me to Prague, not at my own expense. That's not doable, but to, in 10 days, turn a group of people who were interested in the various, and I mean various, magical paths, which I know something about, into magicians. And I said, well, it's not ordinarily something you do in 10 days, but if you'll pay my way, I'll give it a shot. People came from all over Europe, and I said, keep feeding me sweet donut-type things, and whatever you have there, and lots of coffee, and I'll give it, my best shot. And by the time I left, I had helped bring into being, I would say, half a dozen completely different magical paths and groups of people spread all over Europe, from the UK to Serbia. So I think I done good on that one. And then I came back and I wanted to work on a couple of very different book projects. The old edition of my book on the ancient and primitive rite of Memphis and Mitzrayim, which is an ancient ritual magical order, and also I think a key to the connection between UFO stuff and occult stuff, for lack of a good term to use to connect them. As the Compleat Rite of Memphis, and I came out with a completely revised edition because the old edition was selling on various of the rare book sites for, like, as used books for like $300 and $400, and I thought that was outrageous, especially since I don't get a penny for that. Once it's used, there's no residual on that. It's secondary sales. But I came out with a revised edition late last year, and it has been selling off the shelves. I guess shelves is an archaic term now. It's mostly through Amazon. But the revised edition of the Compleat Rite of Memphis is... it has a lot of new material, and it has a section that I put in the back on how to streamline the kind of ritual work that some people are just not don't have the patience with. And it has, judging from the sales in the last 6 months, it has done exceedingly well and is available through Amazon. And then Tim, while I was excited about that, Tim Beckley approached me with an idea, and he said, work with me on this book, Angel Spells. And he said, frankly, Enochian magic, and that's not my field, but I do want to publish this book. So if you'll allow me to use some of your material, and if you'll sort of be spokesperson for the book, I'll put some of the material that you've written about the cipher of the UFOnauts in it. And I said, sure, I'd be glad to. And, just count me in on that. And that has done, according to Interlight Publications, done very, very well also, and has gotten me some really, really strange responses. I just I did a program that I had done before I believe it was in Seattle, or it's Seattle-based, so not too far from the Great White North, really. And they asked me to do a ritual on, which is kind of hard to do on the radio because rituals involves a lot of physical activity. So I said, I'll give it a shot. And I hear through the grapevine that night there was a huge storm in Seattle, and it raised such a ruckus that it was the talk of that particular program. You may know the one I'm talking about, but they sort of blamed the storm on me, and that was not what I was invoking. That would be the ceremony of Bartzabal, which I've never performed and would not be inclined to perform. It was an invocation of Metatron, which is a benevolent force. So maybe instead of a hurricane or a tornado, they had just a heavy windstorm, which nevertheless seemed to impress whoever the host was, Clyde, but whoever the host was there. So it's been an exciting time recently, I would say.
Tell me about this National UFO Conference reunion.
Well, the National UFO Conference was the longest-running UFO convention of ufologists in the world, and I think still holds the record for the largest, the one in 1967 at the Commodore Hotel in New York, which was run by my late friend Jim Mosley, and Roy Finnis was there, and Dr. Condon, who was then the reigning expert on the subject, was there. Even the amazing Randy came and gave a talk on the Nazca lines.
Wow, they were in the old days when he'd actually be in the same room as the ufologists. Well,
the funny thing is that whereas he is skeptical about everything else, for some years in the late 1960s, early 70s, he was pro-UFO, and then he sort of slid over into being anti, which, neither of those terms really apply to me. My attitude is what you were saying a few minutes ago, which I think was very profound. Whatever else it is, it's the great mythos of our time, and needs to be documented for that reason, if no other. And I think the great mythos of one time becomes the profound truth of another, and the origin stories are an entirely separate issue. Did Elvis come back? Did Jesus come back? I don't know. I do know that there were more post-mortem sightings of Elvis reported than those that are reported in the New Testament.
You see, I still don't know if Elvis really went.
Well, that's another totally different aspect. If so, he may be toddling around out there somewhere. Yeah. There is a movie, that shows him in old age in this old age home, and I thought I can't remember the name of it right now. I saw it on Netflix, but it was hilarious. It was absolutely hilarious. Who knows? I mean, it's possible, but the parallels are amazing, because here in the Deep South, there are people with a velvet Elvis on one wall and a velvet Jesus on the other. And his mythos has become religious because he was a religious man, among other things, but also he was from the South, Bible Belt, so... and his tomb is said to be empty, and there were post-mortem sightings that people swear they saw him. Some of them seem to be solid, Elvis is really alive type reports.
Right.
Who can say? A lot of UFO reports and psychic phenomena things border on three-dimensional reality, and some of them are clearly ghosts of Elvis or apparitions of Elvis, and that's precisely what NBC has been churning out, these very, very fundamentalist AD things, and it's remarkably similar. Of course, they're moving a bit off script from the Book of Acts, but still, it is a very similar situation. So how is that going to look 1,000 years from now?
Sure.
They may seem to both be legendary, and somebody once pointed out that when Lincoln was assassinated, his secretary was named Kennedy. When Kennedy was assassinated, his secretary was named Lincoln. 1,000 years from now, maybe they'll say it was the same man. I mean, it really depends on the accuracy of history. One of the things that I'm really very interested in, because we know of the books that we know that existed at one time, because they're mentioned in other books, 90% of those manuscripts, documents, scrolls that have been referred to in those that have survived are completely missing. And there may be, thousands or tens of thousands of others that simply aren't mentioned in anything that has survived. So I think our take on history is very, very ephemeral as UFOs or ghosts or anything else that we tend to be skeptical about. We can't, after all, agree universally on who assassinated Kennedy. So, and that's within the lifetime of some of us older folks. So how are we going to agree on what happened in the Civil War or in, well, there are two entirely different versions, since we just had the 600th anniversary of Runnymede or whatever. There are those who say that King John, who is generally considered to be a horrible person historically, was actually a rather good guy, but the only people that were writing histories were the churchmen of those days, because they were practically the only people that were literate, and they may have just trashed him because he wasn't particularly friendly to the church, as a number of English monarchs were not in the run-up to the Henry VIII separation of church from Rome. So history is a very doubtful thing, and when people talk about the things that I deal with as being, doubtful, I would say, there's a lot of things that are doubtful. The Big Bang when I was a kid was a disputed theory.
Sure.
So don't be so quick to think you know reality and I don't. It's just that none of us do. We just all, in our own way, scrounge around trying to come up with something that works and seems to fit according to our own
requirements. Plus
exactly.
History was written by the victors, not the losers. So the victor could write it any way he wanted to. It's just like today. If you and I are standing on the street while looking up in the sky, you may see something I may not. I may see something that you may not. But that doesn't mean we're both right or we're both wrong. It's a matter of perception.
Yeah, that's quite true, and it depends. That happens so often in historical and even in contemporary ghost cases, although I think the quality of investigations of ghosts and paranormal phenomena of that type has degenerated since the heyday of the Society for Psychical Research. Now it's a group of plumbers on the History Channel who every time they think they see something go, and they take out their little temperature gauges and run around in circles. I mean, I've been on the History Channel a few times, and if my appearances are any indication what actually gets on the air and what corresponds to history,
right?
Then I would say that it's not the History Channel, it's the Legendary Channel. Of course, I don't get after the last appearance. I wrote a little thing, and they haven't invited me back mysteriously. I don't know why.
All right,
It's something to do with the Illuminati, I think.
What did you do?
I didn't give the right answer on the Illuminati, apparently.
Oh.
It's supposed to be, ooh, wow.
Right.
Sitting on Liberty Island, they said, what do you think? Do you think the Statue of Liberty should be torn down? And I said, no. No, it doesn't matter if Masons had anything to do with building it and that it resembles ancient statues. Read the Emma Lazarus poem on the base of it. It happens that I have sailed in my youth out from New York and back to New York the next year. I know what it's like to just look at it and say, I'm home. Yeah. It doesn't matter that it's may have been constructed by a group of Masons and may have some reference to the ancient gods or goddesses. That's an interesting point to look at historically, but I wouldn't tear it down. Now, you just let me say that. That got snipped out, and they cut to some guy who said, yeah, tear the thing down. It's an Illuminati plot. And I think, they just obviously want one kind of answer, that is, the paranoid conspiracy nut type thing. And I don't know, that serves any useful purpose whatsoever, because I've been in this stuff now for, how long ago was 1960?
Quite a few years, yeah.
55 years. Yeah. Well, that's scary. I'm starting to feel like I need a cane here. Well, maybe not. Some of us continue to work out and take vitamins and hope for the best.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, I know very well what the Illuminati is and isn't. I know about Bohemian Grove. I've even been there once. I grew up in a business family, and big business. I mean, a New York Stock Exchange business. So I think you'll find most people that think there is this secret cabal type thing. They did not grow up inside the universe of where the secret cabal would be. The state governors and the Jimmy Carter, the local hick, that sort of universe, and I just don't buy it. I think there is. I'm not pro-globalist at all, but I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's just the world is getting more and more populated. Yeah. It's easier and easier to travel, and business will tend to go where the money is.
That's right.
Where cheap labor is, and where
higher profits are.
Higher profits are, and you can get stuff made and sell it to greedy Canadians and Americans alike, and they'll buy it. Because the latest toy is the latest toy, and it's better to sell cheap junk from China than, and the Chinese are, it's good salaries for them to get that $2 a week on a non-union, in a non-union country, and that doesn't, it's worse than a conspiracy. A conspiracy theoretically could be found and disposed of if you could identify it. But what if it's just greed? If you will, something remotely resembling original sin. That is, we are just greedy beings, and those who are in power are going to tend to want to expand that.
Wow.
I hate to say it, but if you're looking for a conspiracy there, that's what Marx predicted would happen to the world. That when the first world exhausted its resources, it would oppress the labor of the third world. And, that's exactly what's happening. Unionized labor here loses jobs to people that have no... In China, unions are illegal. In India, they're glad to have any job they can get. 1 billion people on a subcontinent that is not particularly productive.
And you see here in Canada and the United States, people are very happy just to sit on their fat butts, collect welfare, drink beer, burp a lot, and scratch their butt and claim they see UFOs.
Oh, that's quite true.
Yeah.
And if they don't have anything better to do, then they'll find some sort of link between 9/11, and on that day there were 3 UFO sightings. Well, let me tell your public, I get 3 UFO sightings somewhere in the world every day.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it's people say, what happened to UFOs? And I said, what
They're
happened
there.
to looking through the media? They're every day. What happened to the Men in Black? Well, I run across Men in Black stories a couple of times a year, wherever there are a lot of UFOs and funny cryptozoological reports. It's some kind of fever of the times, and whether they're real or not, I think is almost irrelevant. It's symptomatic of the kind of times we live in. That tends to happen when people have no real
grasp of reality.
Apatharchists.
Yeah.
My late friend Sam Gasfrin used to call himself an apatharchist. That is, he didn't vote and he didn't care. He was ahead of his time, I'm afraid. The millennials just, I don't know how it is in Canada, although I hear things are not real nice in the city of Toronto or in the Senate. Apparently corruption is not confined to the borders of the U.S.
Of course not. Of course not. I'm amazed that it took them this long to connect the dots.
Well, the deal is, I think in the contiguous United States, there's a tendency of people of moderate to liberal persuasion to think of Canada as the world's, ideal, along with Sweden, which is conveniently located so far away that you really can't just sort of, head across the border from Detroit and find out what's going on. But the fact is, there's much of a common bond, and half of the movies that I see that are really good that are set in the USA are made in Vancouver or made in Toronto.
That's right.
It's pretty much the same culture, allowing for the French culture, but then there's a French culture in Louisiana too. So we have, something of the same mix, and something of the same problems.
That French culture in Louisiana originally came from Nova Scotia, Canada.
Well, you can blame that on the Brits. They deported them.
Let's blame everything on
Britannia.
Hail Britannia, that's right. Hey, listen, I was wondering if you could tell our listeners about the relationship between ghosts, NDEs, and reincarnations.
I think they're part of one continuum, and this is somewhat speculative, but I'll use the... So this isn't a belief, it's a hypothesis. I noticed that in examining hundreds of reports of... I'm not interested in hypnotic reincarnation cases. My father sort of knocked that out of me in the 1950s with the Bridie Murphy book, which he from then on called my mother Maggie Murphy, which irritated her to no end for the rest of her life. But... that people will say under hypnosis what they think the hypnotist wants to hear, because hypnosis isn't a truth serum. It's an alpha state in which pleasing the person talking to you becomes very, very important. Doesn't mean you will do something that runs contrary to your will, but if they say, remember before your birth, you're going to remember before your birth. I'm interested in the spontaneous, mostly early childhood cases where a corresponding human being that was deceased before this person was born makes an appearance. Once in a while in those cases, these children who forget these things by the time they're 6 or 8, according to most of the case studies done by Jim Tucker at the University of Virginia and the lady in Stevenson who was the founder of serious reincarnation research. There is a memory of a between life state, and when I read those cases, they sound almost like the continuation of an NDE. They remember the end of the previous life. That's the most common memory. It's usually violent. I would suspect that people would remember a violent end more so than a serene, quiet end. But they remember the end, and as their life ends, they see a tunnel. Sometimes there is a guiding being at the end of the tunnel. But the one thing that happens in NDE cases that is the opposite of reincarnation cases is, in the NDE case, a voice typically says, "It's not your time, go back." And they wind up back in their body, and they tell the story. Well, in some cases they tell the story, and it corresponds often to things that the person couldn't have known, that suggest out-of-body experiences at the minimum, and maybe something well beyond that. But in the reincarnation cases, the guide takes them to an area and shows them a house, and they haunt the house for a while. That term is never used, but it fits the description of a ghost case. A discarnate being waiting for someone in that household to become pregnant, and they go into that body, and then their memories cease until they are 2 or 3 years old, where they begin to confuse their present life with the previous life. So that connects ghost cases to NDEs to reincarnation reports. And the interesting thing is, the better researched the case is in each and every one of those instances, the more they seem to correspond to one another. Well, it fits. That's all I can really say. It fits if you want to consider them a continuum rather than, that is one continuous thing, rather than 3 separate things that have nothing to do with one another. Doesn't mean everybody reincarnates. I was just reading about the Dalai Lama's somewhat whimsical war with the Chinese government, who's anxious for him to die so they can. It's interesting, an atheist government naming the next incarnation of the Dalai Lama, but they want to, and the Dalai Lama says, the current Dalai Lama says, "I may decide not to reincarnate, but if I do, I'll announce it when I turn 90, he said optimistically.
Good for him. You're quite...
He manages to beat the government of China, which is sort of playing in an arena there that they really don't know anything about and really are out of their depth on.
But it certainly seems like there's a lot of turmoil in the world today, Alan. You know, we've got what's going on in China, North Korea. We've got Russia, who's starting to flex its Cold War muscle again. We have ISIS that wants to take over the world. We've got the crisis in the Middle East. You know, how do we put some semblance of sanity into what's going on in the world today?
I'm the only person that I know of that's not running for president. I don't have to know the answer to that one. I can tell you that having lived in the Middle East and having wandered in the Middle East quite a bit, and even having spent a little time in Algeria, actually being a sort of soldier during the interim period between the French and the Algerian government, which is mostly military, and at first was somewhat idealistic, but had no idea how to form an army. They just hired anybody with the delusion that Americans knew how to shoot guns. They hired some of us to go down to the border with the Spanish Sahara and keep the Spanish Legion, then in Franco's hands, from coming into the country. So I've even done some work for the then Algerian government. They've changed governments 40 times since then. I can tell you that I don't know about Canada, but Canada and England do tend to follow the U.S. lead on these things mostly. Yeah. Only Vietnam was the exception to that for the most part. Of course, Australia, no matter what America does, they send troops. It's just some kind of weird bond with Texas or something. But I don't think that the U.S. government, and that's the only one I can really speak to directly, has any understanding, and that doesn't mean any particular political party, any understanding of the kind of problems and relationships there are in the Middle East. They barely learned that there's a difference between Sunnis and Shias, let alone the most important things are families, and then tribe, and then community, and then a division of religion, and then a culture, and so everything we have done is wrong. And it has only inflamed and expanded the scope. There was no, not only no ISIS, there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. There was just a stupid dictator, a mean, stupid dictator. Mm-hmm. Well, welcome to the Middle East. That's the way it is. Give me a country in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East, that doesn't either have an absolute monarch, a military dictatorship, or some kind of government of fanatical fundamentalists bent on jihad. You got one? We'll give it 10 seconds. There isn't one. I'll save you the time. So the notion that you can go there and make a difference in what essentially is a civil war between various factions, the theocracy, the Shia theocracy in Persia, which we for some reason call Iran, which means Aryan in the Nazi sense, and that's why they named the country that. The notion that we can go into an ugly strongman country, as opposed to the ugly strongman countries that we support, and change it from a dictatorship into a democracy instead of into the civil unrest and jihadists moving in that didn't even, Saddam Hussein hanged jihadists, to be blunt about it. Mm-hmm. So there weren't any. He hanged the communists and then he hanged the jihadists. He was indifferent as long as they weren't members of the Ba'ath Party. But the further I get into it, you may see where my drift is. If you don't know what you're dealing with, all you're doing is shaking a hornet's nest. And what happens when you shake a hornet's nest? The hornets come out and they sting you. And if you shake it again because they stung you, they'll come out in larger numbers and sting you. And eventually, you're the one that has to crawl home and get a shot to survive if you're lucky enough to do that. The fact is, the less we do there, the more quiescent the Middle East tends to be. The more we do, unless we're prepared to be 19th century colonialists, and let's face it, in North America, we are simply not suited to being colonialists. I mean, we came into existence out of colonial powers. You folks in Canada peacefully, we less so. But still, we're not good at that sort of thing. You know, it's very rare that there's any venture in that direction, and it's usually poorly done and not for very long. And unless we're prepared to do what John McCain said, and a very unpopular thing that he never said again, we'd need to stay in Iraq for 100 years, actually permanently. I think that it was a lost cause from the beginning. And the best thing to do there is do nothing. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't civilized people in the Middle East. The Israelis are civilized, the Kurds are civilized, and there's no reason not to arm them if they need it against the wild people around them. But neither of those are Arab countries, and the Arab Spring turned out to be a nightmare, and it proved that the limits of the power of the Internet, those people that are on the Internet are not representative of the population there. They are representative of a small group of westernized idealists, and their ideas are commendable, but they're just not applicable to that part of the world. I'd rather see kings that are happy with their oil money than angry jihadists who are plotting to blow up buildings over here. So leave them alone. The Russians are another thing altogether, and I'd be glad to give you my short Russia lecture too. But there are things we can do there. But I don't think Russia is going to be the kind of danger that it seemed to be. It's not. Is it back to the Soviet Union? It's more like back to the Russian Empire. There are key differences in Russia now. The Russian virtual state religion, the Russian Orthodox Church, seems to have thrived very well during the Soviet years and has essentially captured the country. It's all but a state religion, and only because they declined to be a state religion. And they preach Russian nationalism, but only for Russians. And I think that I oppose their moves in the Ukraine, but I wouldn't go to war over them. I think a global thermonuclear war would be insane for anybody. The Russians know that. Putin knows that. Obama knows that. I know that, and you know that. We've known that. Any of us that go back far enough to remember the world on the edge of nuclear war.
Sure.
We don't want to go back there.
No, they were horrific times.
Nothing is worth going back to that kind of confrontation. So if you want to do things economically or speak up or maybe give the Ukrainians something like the Israeli Iron Dome defense system that was put in place, or give them some tanks that they can be on a par with the Russian army is not going to overtly invade. They'll put people in Ukrainian uniforms to some extent, and they probably are going to keep the Crimea, and they have a reasonable argument for it. The Crimea has been part of the Russian Empire since Ivan the Terrible. I mean, that's just it's not okay with me, but it's not worth World War III. It's as simple as that. China, as long as they're making money in America, and they are, they're not going to go to war with us. North Korea, they have a space program like ours in the 1960s, so maybe they'll send a monkey to the moon. But I'm not really worried about them. They're a silly little country with silly little issues, and somewhere in their bubble, they also know that if they launch their 10.5 missiles, North Korea would cease to exist very quickly, and nobody would say anything about it, least of all the Chinese, because they could just as easily, actually more easily, launch them towards Peking, because they have something that amounts to a new religion. It's called Zhongqi. Are you acquainted with it?
No, I'm not.
It essentially makes gods of the Kim family, and their births are supposedly surrounded by the Korean equivalent of angels, and they're born at auspicious times according to the I Ching, and blah 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 blah, on, and all Koreans are obliged to follow Zhongqi, which means work hard for our beloved divine leaders. It's not the way it gets translated over here, but but if you read about Zhongqi, it satisfies all of the criteria that you could have for a religion. So they've simply replaced Buddhism and Christianity, which were the prevailing religions in Korea before and still are in South Korea, with Zhongqi. And that's it's a purely national thing, and like Shinto in Japan, it isn't going anywhere else. It doesn't fit anywhere else. It's a localistic thing. They have never conquered anything, and they're not going to. And I think the fact that we've kept 50,000 UN peacekeepers, quote unquote, on the divide between North and South Korea for almost all of my life thus far. It hasn't resulted in any great loss of life, and seems to put a cork in the bottle. So don't take them too seriously. They're mostly rhetoric, I think. Have I solved all the world's problems?
You're getting there, but here I have one more twist for you.
Okay, sure,
is it possible, here we are in the year 2015, that we have outgrown the need for religious philosophies? That we are
that we are. Was very persuasive. I mean, that I don't say that I believe it, but I mean, there is an argument that religion is biologically built in, and these are people who started out as Marxist, anti-religious people, and wind up becoming a religion. But go ahead. I can dig the concept. it was good for John Lennon. It's good for the rest.
We touched briefly on aliens. Are they from other worlds, or are they from other dimensions?
I think one of the most remarkable things that has happened, Rob, in recent history, in post-World War II history, is that when UFOs first came to public attention in the modern sense, although they've been around and been reported throughout history, there was the immediate false dichotomy. Either these are spaceships from some other planet, or they are natural phenomena that are seen under unusual circumstances. And under that, you would say also hoaxes and misidentifications, hallucinations, etc. That's a totally false dichotomy. There are many other possibilities, but the key thing for me is, why jump to the other side of the coin being, if they're not natural phenomena, they're from, that is, something within our conventional understanding of the world, they're from outer space. They're not seen in distant outer space. They're not, there have been some funny-looking rocks that the Mars rovers have found, but basically UFOs are confined to the immediate vicinity of or on the Earth. So why immediately go to a very unlikely theory, which is, when I was a kid, they still could say they came from Venus or Mars. Well, Venus is uninhabitable, and Mars may at one time have been inhabitable, but it certainly is a hostile environment now, and clearly is not a place that is sending sophisticated technology here, or they would probably be very annoyed at what we're sending there, So they would have to come from stars. And do they come from nearby stars? There are no really, really nearby stars, let alone stars with Goldilocks zone planets that would be amenable to life as we understand life. Mm-hmm. It's just not the likeliest thing. However, since the 1930s, the prevailing theory in physics is the quantum theory, which is something that Einstein had trouble with. Relativity is one pillar of modern physics, and quantum theory is the other pillar. And if quantum theory is correct, and there's absolutely no serious dissent within serious scientific circles that quantum theory is not correct, then the universe is essentially nothing pretending to be something. And if you try to figure that out in a logical way, you're going to fail at it, because nobody can. It's a mathematical puzzle that if you try to take it out of the world of mathematics and put it into the world of ordinary thinking, mm-hmm. Our minds, from an evolutionary standpoint, it was just day before yesterday that we fell out of a tree, hiding from a tiger or whatever, stood upright and said, "What is this? Oh, my feet are on the ground." I mean, if you think about cosmic time or geological time or even biological time, that just happened a few seconds ago. So we're supposed to understand nothing becomes something. One of the ways of grappling with that is plausible is what's called M-brain theory. That's M, the letter, hyphen, B-R-A-N-E, not like the thing in our heads that goes ticky-tacky and wants to eat and reproduce and die. It's a simple organism. Sorry to put it that way, but that's all we're really built for. And in any case, M-brain theory is that there are multiple realities, perhaps an infinite number of realities. There are some alternates to that, a specific but finite number,
right, that
are not far away or in some distant galaxy far away. They're right here. They're within micro millimeters of our world. In fact, they interpenetrate our world. But under normal circumstances, the senses that we have and the extensions of the senses that we have that we build electronically are just not built to pick those up. What if ghosts and UFOs and cryptid creatures and Men in Black and things that just don't fit, and memories that depart one person from the other, or something that you were pointing out, one person sees and two other people don't, or two people see, and even more interesting, two people see it and the third person does not. What if it's just a momentary glitch in that interpenetration of matrices? You follow me? I mean, I want the listeners to understand. We're talking, 900 miles from one another? I'm roughly in Atlanta, and you're not too far from Niagara Falls, right?
That's right. No, we're right very close to Niagara Falls.
Yeah, okay. So that's quite a distance. But to the listener, we're together, which would be wonderful since we've known each other for 15 years or something like that. But the fact is that the intervening space doesn't show you or me, and you can't hear us unless you have the proper tuning equipment.
Yeah.
And if you have a tuner, you can tune in anywhere. Or if you have internet access and know the proper URL, which is an address, which is the equivalent of a phone number, really, you can hear both of us at the, as if we were talking in the same room. And yet, anywhere in between without a tuner, we cease to exist for all practical purposes, even though we are there as pulses in the ether. So why not things that are pulses in the ether that we don't ordinarily have tuners for? It makes sense. It isn't something that's provable at this moment, but it makes sense, and it conforms to my notion that there are clues to the next major UFO event in the last major UFO event, which is what I've been writing about since the mid-1990s, and which Beckley has revived in Angel Spells. So there you go. It's credible, but not provable, but it's something to think about.
The time has come where we're going to have to say so long very shortly, Alan. What are your final thoughts and message for the worldwide listening audience of the X-Zone on Starcom?
I think the best thing that I can say is don't take what most people say about these various phenomena or about world conspiracies at face value. Examine in detail, use logic, step back from it, and ask yourself, is this reasonable? Is this credible? And the more you learn, the more you'll be apt to have a ghost of an idea, no pun intended, as to what is really going on. That is the story of my life, and I encourage other people to find some measure of wisdom in the same way. Jesus, that sounds like an obituary.
It does.
No, I'll be back.
Yes, you will. Alan, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure talking to you again, my friend. Please, I hope it doesn't take as much time to get you back on as it was the first time.
All you need to do is ask me.
All right,
I'm
Alan.
always good.
You take care of yourself.
Take care.
The best. Bye-bye now. And
Bye-bye.
That's it for tonight, my friends. Another 4 hours have come and gone here in the X-Zone. I'll be back tomorrow night once again at 8 o'clock as we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X-Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. And until tomorrow night at 8 p.m., always keep your eyes to the sky and your heart to the light. Good night, everyone.